Welcome to Overcaffeinated and Out of Effs, the podcast for burned out, career-minded moms who are ready to stop pretending everything's fine and feel like themselves again. I'm your host, Christy Gamir, burnout coach for moms, licensed therapist, and mom of two. And I'm here to help you reclaim your energy, your identity, and your peace of mind. Whether you're lying awake thinking about the 87 things you didn't get done, or silently resenting the people you love most, this is your space to feel seen, supported, and not so alone. So grab your coffee, hot, cold, or day old, and let's get into it. Hey everybody, it's Christy. Welcome to Overcaffeinated and Out of Effs. Today I'd like to welcome our guest, Katie Gray. Katie is a growth-focused marketing leader with nearly 2 decades of experience helping companies scale through data-driven strategy and compelling storytelling. Throughout her career, she's worked in a number of leadership positions and has expertise in customer acquisition, lifecycle marketing, brand development, and digital transformation, which she's used to lead high-impact initiatives across multiple channels to drive meaningful business and revenue growth. Katie is also a brand new mom of a beautiful baby girl who will be 5 months old in just a couple days. So I've invited Katie today to share her story as a new mom who has also had a very successful, very demanding career, because I really believe that her experiences include pieces that are going to resonate with so many other moms, although they might not necessarily be talking about it. Katie, she's going to talk about all of these things. We're going to get into all of this in more depth, but she's going to touch on a little bit about how at one time she didn't want kids and was very focused on her career, that eventually changed. She's going to talk a little bit about what led to those changes, any challenges that she's had getting pregnant, her experiences with fertility, and then becoming a first-time mom at 41 while also starting a brand new job in a city she just recently moved to. One other thing that I want to mention that makes Katie a super special guest is that she is actually my best friend of over 30 years. We go way back, all the way to elementary school, and we have been through a lot together. So I'm so excited that she's agreed to be a guest on this podcast because, as I mentioned, I think her story and experiences are just going to bring so much value to those of you listening. So, Katie, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be a part of the podcast I've been listening to.
Yeah. Well, so why don't you, just start off by telling everybody just a little bit about yourself, maybe a little bit about your family, your career, and what all of that maybe looked like for you before becoming a mom.
Sure. So I worked in pretty demanding jobs and careers by choice prior to becoming a parent, and arguably after as well. But I started my career in New York City, essentially working at advertising agencies, which are notorious for having long hours, but you have fun. You work hard, play hard, I think is the epitome of that type of career. And I really did. I put in the hours. I worked really hard. I loved it. It's a very creative field. I worked more on the marketing strategy side of things, so not the creative piece, but the piece where you're working really closely with clients to come up with business plans and marketing strategies that are going to align to their goals. And I did that for 13 years in New York City, and then decided right before the pandemic happened, before we even knew there was going to be a pandemic, I moved to Los Angeles with my partner for a different pace of life. I still wanted to have a career that I loved and enjoyed, but wanted to be able to do more balanced things outside of work. And for me, what that meant was being in a city where we could get outside and hike more. We could go to the beach. We could work really hard, but we could also drive 30 minutes and be in the mountains and spend a weekend at a cabin and just unplug from everything. I spent 5 years in Los Angeles working at news publications, which was its own challenge. I started right after the 2016 election, so news was very top of mind for a lot of people, but admittedly chose careers at different moments in the world and in my life where they demanded a lot of me, and I was willing to give that 100%.
So I imagine, that was obviously very different for you, before having kids, and obviously a lot has changed, I'm sure. since your daughter was born, which, I'm gonna want to hear, I'll ask you more about that in a minute. But I did want to just ask you, I know that for a long time, when you were very focused on your career, you were very focused, on your relationship with your partner. There was a time when you didn't want kids. You didn't really see them as part of your future. And I'm wondering if you could just talk a little bit about what was behind that decision and like what you sort of envisioned your life to look like and be like without kids.
Yeah, it's not that I always tell people it's not that I didn't like children because I did. I babysat from when I was 12 years old. I have some young cousins in my family that I would always hang out with and take care of when we got together for family reunions. Like, I very much enjoyed other people's children, but it just wasn't something that I planned on for myself or had ever dreamt about, to be honest with you. I wasn't one of those girls that grew up and was like, "I'm gonna be a mom," or frankly, like, "Get married one day," and all these things. And it's not that I didn't have models of successful relationships and families in my life. Frankly, you could say, like, my own nuclear family was a positive example because my parents are still together. They didn't get divorced when a lot of people's parents did growing up in the '90s, and 2000s when it started becoming, I think, more prevalent with my friends' parents. But it just wasn't something I ever thought would be for me, and part of it was just the work-life balance, and part of it was I just didn't see myself as a mother. I did always see myself a dog parent. That I did dream about since I was little, so I can relate to people when they say like, "Oh, I always thought I'd be a mother, and I knew even when I was young." Like, it sounds silly, but it's true. Like, I always knew I would have dogs, and I knew I would
Mhm.
them and really love them, and so it just wasn't something I thought about with babies, honestly, until 3 years ago. It was late in my life when I started
Well, and it's interesting, that you talk about that just because I think that there are actually a lot of people out there, a lot of women out there, especially today, who are really invested in their careers and they don't necessarily, plan to have kids or want to have kids. That's maybe just not the life that they are envisioning for themselves. I do think that it's something that people don't always talk about as openly just because of, these societal expectations. Like, I think a lot of people sort of get this message that as women, that's just part of the plan, right? That's what we're supposed to be doing is we're supposed to be having kids and we're supposed to be wanting kids. And I don't know that that's really the case for everybody. Well, I mean, I know it's not the case for everybody. And so I'm just wondering, from your perspective, did you ever feel any of that pressure, whether it was direct or not? Did you feel pressure from other places to have kids?
I never did, which is interesting. My parents have always been very supportive of my choices, and they're great. I think they recognize because I never talked about wanting kids. I never said, like, I'm never having kids, but I never voiced an interest in it. My parents aren't the kind of people who'd be like, "Hey, are we getting grandkids?" Or "Have you considered this?" Or "We really want grandkids." They just never, they're really good listeners, and they've been really clear with me that all they want is for me to be happy, which sounds cliche, but they're like, "Whatever that looks like for you, we want you to be happy." And there have been moments in my life where, they've said, "You work really hard. We just wanna make sure you're not putting too much effort in there, that you're giving yourself time, that you don't get burnt out." But they've never said to me, like, "You have to have kids," or "We want grandkids," which has been nice. So I never felt pressure there. And I don't think I've ever felt it from my friends either. Like, people like you, I've always been very happy for you and my friends when they have kids, and I know that's what you want, and I love celebrating you and them, but, none of my friends either. They've asked me, of course, like, we've had conversations because friends if we didn't, but never in a way where it's like, "Why aren't you having kids?" More like, "Oh, do you want kids? Is that something you see for yourself?" But I don't think I ever felt that pressure. In fact, starting a new job, it struck me that this is the first time in my career where when HR talks through the benefits during onboarding where I'm like, "Oh, I should pay attention." Because usually when you're like, "This is maternity leave, and this is what healthcare looks like." I'm like, "Blah, blah, blah, who cares? I'm just visual plan, it doesn't matter."
Yeah, you should just like tune all that stuff out.
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and then obviously, something's changed for you. I mean, you talked about, not really. thinking about kids until you were older, and so I hope it's okay. I'm going to put this out there. 41 years old
Oh,
is, um, you know, obviously, more and more people are having babies in their 40s, but more often we hear about people starting to at least think about or planning for babies, in their 20s and 30s. And so, I'm curious, like, what changed for you? What influenced your decision to try for a baby and then change your mind?
it's interesting, or I think it's interesting in that my partner is actually the one who wanted kids and brought it to me. And I'll always appreciate, and this is part of what I love about him, but also really value in how he approached this conversation with me maybe 4 or 5 years ago, which is he never made it an ultimatum and it was like, "I want kids with or without you." The conversation was more like, "I've been thinking about what life looks like down the road, and what we have now is really great, and I'm really happy. I think down the road, it could be even greater if we had kids. But if you don't want, I'm happy doing what we're doing now, and, like, I'm still choosing you." And that's the way he approached the conversation with me, which I really appreciate because it wasn't like, "This is happening whether you want it or not, I'm gonna go get it." It was like, "I'm choosing you, and I would like
Mhm.
us, but if it's not what you want, like, I still want this life that we have." So that changed the conversation, and we talked about it and thought about it, and honestly, like, I talked to my therapist about it too, and it wasn't that I was against having kids, I just truly had never considered it. I didn't think about it at all because I didn't think it was gonna my life. But in talking to my partner more about it and my therapist about it and friends about it, I decided that it was something that I thought would be really special to do, specifically with my partner. And a point I arrived at with my therapist that I think was helpful, and I think is still true, is that I don't necessarily want kids. What I wanted was to build a family with my partner. So if he was the picture, then no, I'm not one of those people who would have gone out and been like, "I'm having a kid no matter what at any cost." That's what I decided. It was I wanted to specifically start a family with him, and that's what changed.
Okay. So it sounds like, you had a lot of support behind you. Again, you didn't have this pressure. It sounds like you were really given the space to think about things and then reflect on things and figure out what you really wanted, which I imagine was incredibly helpful for you. But initially, when he first brought that up to you, so you said that it was something you had never even thought about before, right? It wasn't something that you didn't want them, you just never really considered it. So I'm curious, like at the very beginning stages of those conversation, um, did those bring up any concerns for you about how that might affect your career, which you obviously invested so much time and energy into your identity? It's becoming a mom, adding that to your identity, adding that to your roles is obviously a big change. Did you have any concerns around that?
Not initially. I It seems so far away at that time, like, I knew we wanted to get pregnant, and I knew that would be different for me than anything I'd experienced before, but I don't think I'd really conceptualized how things might change. I knew how things would change, right? And I knew we'll talk about it's hard to be a mom and to go back to work or, like, to balance the 2 things. We've all heard the saying, like, you don't balance the things, you do well at one or the other every day, and you kind of have days where one thing's up and the other's down, and that's just how it exists. I knew about that stuff, but the more detailed how it was gonna feel, I didn't really have set expectations. I think in some ways that helped me because I truly never thought I was gonna have kids, so I didn't have any expectations of what that experience was gonna be like, what giving birth was gonna be like. I really was just along for the ride. It's really to be there, but I wasn't like, "Oh, I always thought that I would have the baby in this setting, there'd be candles and what." I was just like, "I'm gonna have the baby. I don't know what's gonna happen." I've never really thought about it before, but now I'm thinking about it, and we're gonna see how it goes, and I kinda felt the same way about how I'd approach my career afterwards. I knew that I was gonna go back to work, I just didn't know the details yet, other than I was gonna go back to work and knowing from friends like you that I should sign up from daycare early and get some details in order. The emotional side of it, I didn't really know what to expect. So I didn't have a lot of don't wanna say thought that I put into it because I was mindful about it, but I just didn't know what was coming.
So sort of like, this is coming. I know it's going to be different, but I don't know what I don't know. I'm just going to kind of be open to it and roll with it and sort of like figure things out as it happens.
Exactly, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So I'm gonna switch gears just a little bit, and I'm gonna bring up a topic that I know can be a bit sensitive. And I wanna and I know that this is something that a lot of moms experience, but they don't always feel comfortable talking about it. And I know you have been very open about this, and I had asked you ahead of time if it would be okay for me to ask you, and you had said yes, and so I really appreciate your willingness. But that's your fertility journey. Right? And so I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about that and what that was like for you, both emotionally and physically.
Yeah, I had that conversation with my partner about starting a family when I was, I wanna say 38. And so my first thought was we should do IVF or freeze my eggs because at the time we knew we wanted to leave Los Angeles, but we didn't exactly know where we were gonna move. And we knew we wanted to start a family, but we didn't know exactly how that was gonna happen. But I knew my age was gonna be a factor. And so that was my first thought. And I think egg freezing is something some of my friends have done when they were younger. And I knew it was something that helped safeguard for your ability to have children in the future. So we started IVF right away. We went to see the doctor, a fertility specialist, and he basically talked to us about the options and essentially told us that if you know who you want the father of your children to be, in this case, we did, then he's like, you have better success rates freezing embryos than freezing eggs.
Uh,
May as well freeze embryos. Like, let's do that process. So similar, you do the egg harvesting, then you actually make the embryos and freeze those versus just freezing the egg. So we went through that process and we ended up with no viable embryos. I think we had 7 eggs that he harvested, made 5 embryos, which we were really excited about, and then only 2, like, made it the first 2 days, and then only 1 made it past, like, the blastocyst age of, like, the 5 days, and then that one was genetically tested and it wasn't viable. So we were disappointed. We also I always tell people we also kinda went about it backwards because we didn't know, right? And I don't regret it because we learned so much about, fertility and health and how to go about things from that process, even though it was really disappointing and very expensive. It was sad to not be able to have anything at the end of that whole process, but we also tried that. We'd even tried to get in our own. So we were like, pause and try to get pregnant naturally just while we move to another state. And then if we don't get pregnant by the time we, like, move into our new house, then we'll try IVF again. So that was our plan. We moved, and we met with my fertility doctor in our new city. We had all the plans made, and I had heard from several friends that acupuncture could help fertility outcomes when you do IVF. So I found a fertility specialist, luckily really close to where we live, worked with her, she's lovely. Never overpromised anything. She open with me about, like, we're gonna work towards positive outcomes with the egg harvesting, and then I'll go through, if you get implementation stage, here's how acupuncture helps, because I did have a high stress job as well, and she was talking about that's a lot of what acupuncture can do to help with the outcomes. So I started acupuncture, and then within 2 weeks of doing it, actually got pregnant on my own, which was shocking. We didn't it's even something that could happen. Unfortunately, that was a chemical pregnancy. So that wasn't viable. So then we were disappointed again after being so we were like, "Wow, this happened," and then it was just really sad and upsetting and disappointing. But my acupuncturist, she's an angel. She was like, "You know what? Let's just keep working towards your IVF outcomes. You can still do that. I wanna work with you for 2 months." I guess 90 days or 60 to 90 days is when you can have the most positive impact using acupuncture for IVF. So we just kept on that road, and she was like, "But while we do this, why don't you keep trying to get pregnant? And then if you get pregnant before, great, and if you don't, you still have your IVF." And then a month later, I got pregnant, and that pregnancy luckily was healthy, and that was my daughter.
is amazing, and she is oh my gosh, the most adorable little baby.
Yep.
Yeah, and I really appreciate, you talking about that because again, I feel like this is something that so many people go through, and I think it's something that feels very isolating for a lot of people because they're not always talking about it. And so I really appreciate you sharing that. Do you feel like having your first baby, in your 40s, do you feel like that brought on any extra challenges for you, either physically, mentally, emotionally, versus having them, starting to have kids in your 20s or 30s?
I do. It's funny, my dad said something to me a while ago before I knew I wanted to have kids. We were talking about something else, but he was saying how there's 2 choices. You either choose to have kids when you're young and you grow up with them, or you choose to have kids when you're a little older and you do your growing up first and then you have them. And he was like, no one answer is right, but that's kind of the 2 ways you do it. And I thought that was really insightful, and I do think that's true, and I definitely did my growing up first. I will say, I was talking to my partner about this the other day, having a child in my 40s, feel very lucky and fortunate that she's healthy and everything. We took a lot of steps to do everything we could to make that possible. I was also very careful during my pregnancy because I was really, I think as a, first time pregnant person, just like nervous about everything, and you read, like, you shouldn't eat tuna, but you can eat some, don't eat sushi, but maybe it's okay at all, and I just avoided everything because I was just really nervous about it,
Yeah.
regardless of my age. But then the age
Mhm.
I was reminded of during every appointment, because in my chart and the doctors, they're like, "Oh, you're AMA, advanced maternal age. Oh, you're AMA, so we should do this." During the last trimester of my pregnancy, I would get a non-stress test every week just to make sure the baby, even though everything had been healthy and good up till then, she was still kicking and moving as she should. But there were just moments where I was reminded of, it made me feel a little self-conscious at times because I was like, "Oh, this is something extra I go through because I chose to wait so long." I never felt guilty about it, but it was just always present. And it's funny, it's something sometimes I feel like I have to qualify my experience with when I talk to other moms, like, "Oh, and I'm 41 and I just had my first baby," but I'm trying not to do that so much because I think sometimes it it makes me feel like it's invalidating my experience a little bit, or like that's the whole focus of my experience when it was a part of it, but for me, it wasn't be part of the journey. But then my partner was telling, he sees it a really different way where he's like, "I think the fact that you can have a baby when you're 41 is inspirational, and it gives other people hope, and it makes them realize, like, they could do it too, and that's why you should share it." So when he said that, I was like, "Oh, I guess I can see the other side of it." I didn't think of it as inspirational. Sometimes it feels more like, really not shameful, but like, "Oh, I waited so long, and now I got to have this baby, and that's so great, but maybe I shouldn't have waited so long," and then it brings up all these conversations with whoever I'm talking to about, like, however they feel about their age, and it's always complicated by individual how they feel.
Well, yeah, and I feel like that also goes back to what I was talking about a little bit about, a little bit before about like these societal expectations and these pressures that are put on us. Like I was talking about it earlier in the sense of having babies at all. But the reality is that there are pressures and there are expectations coming from other people. Sometimes they're expectations that we sort of assume or anticipate, are coming from other people. And a lot of times that can be part of our conversations, but to your point, everybody's experiences and journeys are very, very different, but there are a lot of things that can have some similarities, right? And so, yeah, like it sounds like there are maybe some challenges that came along with it, but I love how, he talked about it being inspirational because, yes, there are a lot of women, especially I think nowadays, who are wanting to have kids at an older age. And so, yeah, I agree that I imagine it's very helpful for them to be able to hear a story like this. And can I just say, by the way, you didn't use this word, but I feel like this was the word I always heard all the time because I also had babies, a little bit older. Uh, Geriatric pregnancy.
Oh,
Whoever
yeah.
came up with that term, I don't know. I feel like they need to come up with something better than that. Like, I understand it, but also it's like, okay, I'm in my 30s and you're using the word geriatric.
Yeah, that never feels great. And the other thing that I just wanna mention is, I had a really great support system. All my friends like you, when I was going through it and I was like, "Oh, I wonder if it's weird that I'm, like, 41 and pregnant for the first time," and then I reflected on it while I was pregnant, and I was like, no one who I've told has been like, "But you're 41." Everyone, especially you, were like, "I'm so happy for you, congratulations," and, people just wanted to know how I was feeling, how the baby's doing, like, no one cared how old I was, and so a lot of that was just in my head as well, but I think too, when you're going to every doctor's appointment and they're like, "Oh, you have a geriatric pregnancy," that helps to keep it in your mind.
Yeah, yeah, no, it's hard to it's hard to get away from that. So now she is almost 5 months old. And I one of the things that I mentioned earlier, but just as a reminder for the people listening, that you just recently started. Not only did you just come back from your maternity leave just a few weeks ago, but you came back to a brand new job, right? You're also starting a new job at the same time. And so there were a few big changes that were happening all at once. And I'm wondering, like, how did you feel? Like, how did it feel for you as you were getting closer to the end of your leave and then preparing to go back to work? And then just like, what was that transition like for you?
It was surprising to me how sad I felt about it. I mentioned
Mhm.
earlier that I didn't have expectations about being pregnant or having a baby or frankly, like work-life balance. Like I didn't have an expectation for myself. I knew those would all be moments of change and transformation, but I didn't know what it would look like for me. And when I was getting ready to go back to work, I'd say starting a month before, I knew it was gonna weigh heavy on me. I could just feel that I was dreading it a little bit. Not I wasn't dreading starting work at a new place, that I was excited about, but I was dreading having to leave her because for every single day of her life up until then, I was with her and taking care of her, and then to think about not being there for her was just gut-wrenching. And I remember the night before I started my job, I was just sobbing, and I went to my partner and I was like, "I'm just so sad because she means so much to me," and he's like, "She's gonna be okay, it's gonna be okay." He was very reassuring, and then I remember putting her down for bed that night, and I was just so, so sad, and I was just staring at her and feeling like I was leaving her and abandoning her in her moment of need, and then, of course, she was fine. Was I was at work and everyone was like, "She smiled and she played all day and she was great." And then I would when I came home. So that was really hard, but navigated through that. I'm only on week 3 right now, so I don't know, there's certain challenges ahead that I'll face, I'm sure, that I haven't even been aware
Mhm.
of. And then
Yeah.
starting a new job felt really exciting and new and fresh and, getting to meet new people, and I'm going in the office a few days a week, so that was cool, but also nerve-wracking. But everyone's been so welcoming and supportive. I've just been really open with them. I think I try to be very transparent as a leader at work, but I would say that now extends to my work-life balance discussions with them because I've been leaving at 5 o'clock every day to come home because by the time I get home, I see my daughter for 45 minutes then before she goes to bed. If I leave at 5, if I leave after, I don't care at all. And certainly there are days where that's gonna happen, but we try to leave right at 5, and I've just been telling people, like, "Here's why I leave. I'll get back on email when I get home if I need to." But I'm just trying to put it out there so everyone knows what's going on, and I don't have to apologize for it, but I also wanna make sure people know I'm not shirking my duties or that it's not that I don't care about them or the work.
Yeah, well, and also it sounds like you're managing expectations, right? By setting those boundaries. I mean, boundaries is something we talk about all the time, and I think that they're so important and they're so helpful, but they can be harder sometimes to implement them later, by starting them like right off the bat, like managing people's expectation. I imagine that that probably helps a little bit with that too, right? Like they know, like you've got to leave at 5 o'clock and you'll make sure that you're fulfilling all those responsibilities, like you said. And in terms of like what you had said about going back to, daycare and just feeling like the sadness and, you know, having her start there. And I feel like, yes, that's another thing. I mean, I personally had like the exact same experience, right? Where just going back to daycare was initially one of the hardest things, for me. And then my kids were fine, right? And I really think that a lot of people told me that they would be, and they were, and it did get easier over time, and I honestly think a lot of times it's harder on us than it is on them. Because yeah, like there are all these fears, all these feelings, all these things that come up, but yeah, they're okay. And I'm glad to hear that you've been having that experience too. I mean, I know it's still new and you're still transitioning, but yeah, I'm glad to hear she's off to a good start with that.
Yeah, it's
So,
been
oh,
it's
go
been
ahead.
a journey. Oh, sorry. Yeah, and one of the things that helped me too, I hope I'm not oversharing, is in talking to people like you, and you told me, you were like, "I hear all your feelings, I felt those too," and then you told me, you're like, there came a point where I felt all those things you do, and then I was really glad I had daycare because even on days when I didn't have to go to the office to work, I would still take the kids because I had other stuff to get done." And I was like, "Okay, I know you love your kids so much." And I'm like, "If you feel that way or felt that way, then I know I will get there too, and it's gonna be okay."
Yeah, and I also just one of the things that I wanna mention about that too is I think that a lot of moms also struggle with this idea, not just an idea, I think a lot of times it happens, is this judgment that we get from other moms who maybe do things differently, and we all need to do things in a way that works best for us. And I've heard people make comments before about how, like, oh, well, if you're not working, why are you sending your kids to daycare? Right. And it doesn't feel great hearing those comments. But honestly, I don't let those things bother me because I know I'm not doing anything wrong. Like, I have to do these things one way or another. And I can either do them, like get my chores and stuff done while my kids are at daycare, or I can scramble and struggle to do them on the weekend when I'm trying to spend that time with them then. You know what I mean? So I think that it's completely fine for people to do things in that way. You just have to do things in a way that works best for you. But also, even if people don't agree with it, even if other people want to do things differently, like that's okay. That's their choice, that's their journey. But it's still okay to do things, in this other way too, even if people don't agree. So, what would you say has surprised you most about motherhood so far?
I was thinking about this question a lot, and this is a very tactical answer, but honestly, the breastfeeding.
Okay.
That has been a journey, and I know from other moms like you and from visiting you after you had your first child, I know it's a thing. Like, I knew it was a thing that people do, and that takes a lot of work and time. I think I didn't realize how much of a commitment it was until, being in it and having my daughter, and I also think people don't talk about it in as much detail because they don't wanna scare you off from doing it. I don't think people hide things, but I don't think they really go through the
Mhm.
nitty of it until you're in it and you're like, "Oh my god, this is insane." Like, I didn't realize that, like, having my daughter, so maybe TMI, but I've been pumping for her since she was 3 days old because she had jaundice, and so when she actually had to be hospitalized for it, she's totally fine, but you had to get light therapy, a lot of babies do. The lactation consultants and doctors had me start pumping for her to make sure she was getting enough food so that she could get the bilirubin out of her system and get rid of the jaundice. So she was drinking from a bottle at 3 days old. And initially, everyone was saying, wait until they're 3 or 4 weeks old or even longer until you give them a bottle so they don't have nipple confusion. So I had no idea I had this breast pump and I had no idea what to do with it. And the nurses were like, okay, just start using it. And I was like, how? What am I supposed to do? So they showed me, but the fact that it's really a lifestyle, like, I'm still pumping every 3 hours for her, and that's whether I'm in the office that day or not, and trying to make enough milk for her. I remember she was a month old, and I maybe had, like, 6 little bags of breast milk frozen, and we already started to have to use them because she was going through a growth spurt, and I was panicking because I was like, "I don't have enough milk. I'm not gonna make it." So I would ask you who'd been more experienced with it like what you did and tried to learn, but that has been the most surprising. It is a privilege to be able to provide for her and feed her. It's a lifestyle for the next year, and it's also like, I guess I should realize this, none of my old clothes fit. I kind of tried being the baby, "Oh, I'm, like, down to my pre-pregnancy." Now I'm like, "Well, I'm gonna be like this for as long as I'm pumping for her, and I'm getting to a place where I'm okay with that, like, physically look and physically how it makes me feel, um, but that's been a transition too.
Yeah. So many things are coming to mind for me right now, like as I'm listening to you talk, and I do think that breastfeeding, yeah, it's one of those things, again, that I think catches so many people off guard. It's one of those things that I personally never really heard people talking about, the challenges that come with that. You go to these, classes to learn about what it's going to be like, after your baby is born, and they're showing like the baby just naturally going to the nipple and everything is just so easy, seemingly easy and all of that. And I'm sure some people have that experience, but for so many people, it is very different. And to your point, yes, it is a lifestyle. It's not just hey, let me do this and then I'm done with it. Like it's something that consumes our lives for a very big period of time, no matter what that looks like, right? So it could be breastfeeding, it could be pumping, it could be formula feeding, it could be some combination of everything, you know? I do think that that's something that catches a lot of people off guard. And again, something that I think sometimes people are feeling pressure or maybe they are feeling some judgment around the decisions, but we're all just doing the best we can, right? And at the end of the day, like as long as to your point, she's fed, she's healthy, I mean that's and you're doing everything in a way, like you figured out a way that it does work for your life, which is obviously really important too.
Yeah, it continues to be a journey.
Yes, continues to be a journey that will continue forever. Right? And maybe not this stage, but parenthood in general. Okay, so I know that people are very busy. You're very busy. I'm very busy, and actually, like I just want to sort of mention to people, and I said this to you before we even started the conversation about how I would maybe let people know that we're meeting on Sunday morning because that was the time that just worked with our schedule the best. And I hear her in the background making noises. I hear my own kids thumping around downstairs. And I just sort of wanted to call attention to that for anybody who is maybe hearing it because, again, like this is something that I think that we all sort of deal with, we all sort of experience, and it's just part of the gig, right? Part of managing our lives and all the things that go with that. So before we wrap up though, like if you could just say, maybe one thing to the other women who are listening who are unsure if motherhood is for them or maybe they're having a hard time conceiving, what would you tell them? Do you have any advice or any words of encouragement?
What worked for me, and I'm mindful that, like you said, with the breastfeeding, like it looks different for every person, and what works and doesn't work for you is different, and every answer is good. I would say that about my response too. For me, what worked is widening my village of support, especially my fertility journey. There were moments where I felt like I wanted to keep my circle small of who knew about it and what I was doing because I wanted to myself, not that I thought anyone would be critical, but just when you go through something big, you're like, "Oh, do I wanna tell 40 people that this didn't work now?" So I just felt like I had things small. And it was actually my partner who, when we went through the chemical pregnancy, he was like he saw what I was going through, and he was, "Maybe I should tell people 'cause you need support, and I'm happy to be your need support. I'm always here for you, but I think you need more than what I alone can give you, and I can make sure you're okay." And that was the best thing for me to hear, was to basically widen my village, and then we told my parents, so I think I had already told you, but if I hadn't, I talked to you about it in detail then about what was happening. And I just widened my village a little bit, and what that actually I was worried that people would have expectations of me that I would be letting them down, honestly, if things didn't work out. But what it meant was I had so much support from people who I care about and who cared about me, like you, and you were great about me, you know what I mean? And it were like, "Are you at" but so I but it was like, "Are you?" And about me and supporting me, and "How are you feeling?" And that made me feel so good every time I heard from you, even though we live far apart. My parents me on me. It really helped me to get through times that felt very difficult because I knew that no matter what happened, there were people who loved me and that I would be okay. And so that would be my advice for people who are feeling like they're struggling with fertility and maybe have to keep their all widening out feels maybe uncomfortable. It did for me, but it actually did make me feel really supported. And then when I did have grief too, of course, made me feel like, okay, I have a group of people who I know love and support me, and no matter what, they're gonna be here for me. What was even more exciting to tell people my needs and then them to be journey with me.
Yeah, no, I think that that's really great advice. Support system, having a support system is something that obviously we talk a lot about too, but I do think that people struggle sometimes to lean on their supports at times for a number of different reasons, whether it's I don't want to be quote unquote burdening them or, they're busy with their own lives or whatever. Or in your point, I mean, like you said, the things that we're dealing with were very personal um and maybe it felt a little bit safer at times to keep that closer. But yeah, like our friends and family, I think it's important to remember that the people who are closest to us, they want to be there for us. They want to support us. They want to help us through things because they care. And it's really, really not just okay, but it's a really positive thing, just in general, whenever we're going through a hard time, we tend to move through those things better when we are able to use our support. So I think that that's a really great point. So, I guess, I just wanted to thank you again, so much for being here. That's probably a good place for us to wrap up for today. And I know you're very, very busy. And so I just think that this was so awesome. I think that there was so much helpful information in there that I think is really going to resonate with a lot of people. So I really do appreciate that. And to all the moms who are listening, as always, you hear me say this, that if any of this does resonate with you, or, you found things that we talked about today to be helpful, please just remember to share this with any other moms who could maybe use some additional support too. Because again, we're all in this together.